Welcome to the Intrazone, a show about the Microsoft 365 Intelligent Intranet. I'm Mark Cashman here with my co-host, Chris, the guy who just barely snuck in a sports reference last time, but he's going to hit a home run this time, McNulty.
Thanks, Mark. Hope to be able to take a crack at it here at the plate. Today, we'll be hearing from Ben Vanderberg. He's the SaaS Tech Evangelist, Strategist, and Speaker at Adobe. So we're going to dig into the core of our partnership with them.
We spoke to Ben about various touch points between our two companies, Adobe integration with Microsoft 365, Power Platform, Teams, Edge, SharePoint, and more. We also took a trip down PDF memory lane and the most recent innovation for working with PDFs, something we also highlighted at the Microsoft 365 conference with a nice demo of OneDrive opening in-app. This feature, also known as Open PDF directly into Adobe Acrobat, keeping the file in place. It was really nice to make that synergy between the real world and this conversation with Ben.
We'll also get into some of the recent Adobe AI announcements like Project Firefly, Generative Sensei AI, news that they've made at Adobe Summit 23 and NAB 23.
So, Chris, I know you use Adobe Premiere from time to time. And there may be other products that you leverage that I don't know about. Do you have an earliest memory of when your world and the tech world collided with Adobe?
Definitely the first time I was able to make my own PDF. It's something we take for granted now, that you're going to just render a doc and it's going to have the right layout and I'm going to be able to look at it in a whole bunch of different devices without having access to the original file. And you kind of have this set in stone. But it was absolutely magical the first time, I saw a PDF that someone could send me a doc and I would be able to just read it and be able to read it with like publishing levels of quality. It still astonishes if I stop and think about it. How about you?
So my earliest memory is more in the moving cinema piece. A long time ago, this is pre-Cash Kids, so to date myself a little, my oldest is now over 21, so this is over 21 years ago. I had just a tiny little project that I was doing trying to make a little money. It was called Box of Photos, Inc. And my concept was send me all of your photos and I'll sort of do the Ken Burns effect with Adobe Premiere. And it was really fun. I put together maybe 5 or 6. I got a couple of projects and was using Adobe Premiere to basically import images and scan them and then add music and some transitions and, of course, motion to the photos. And for me, it was the first time where I really felt like, wow, I can make something. I can create something. And I'd worked with a number of people who were professional editors, with some professional editing software. But it was really that first touch point where I felt like I could do it, or I could at least accomplish the thing that I wanted to create on my own PC, on my own time, and in some sad, maybe a little bit way, in my own basement. But that was fun. And I really have enjoyed kind of keeping that muscle if I ever need to do an edit, similar to how I know that you do. I know that your earliest memory around PDFs has also led into something that we now do significantly at scale, PDFs being a pretty common scenario for syntax. Any specific insights with syntax PDFs, even if it's ancillary?
Well, yeah, I mean, we've got features that we've announced, but we haven't shipped yet, using syntax to make it easier to work with a PDF for being able to reorder it, break them apart, merge them, password protect them. Being able to do that directly from inside of M365 is capability that we designed and we're building it and we'll ship it soon.
I saw another thing that fell into your category. I think it was the OneDrive team. This might be starting in Android on the mobile app to be able to open up a PDF and then navigate through which pages you might want to then, have a smaller new PDF that you output with only a subset of those pages, but to be able to do all of that on mobile.
And interesting hearing you talk about, some of the work you're doing with photos. I remember rather ambitiously trying to do video editing on a PC in the late 90s. And you just had to wait forever for these giant files to get download it to your system, and then to render it took a long time. And it's just gotten so much smoother, and it's something you can do reasonably well on a mobile device now too. And it's just absolutely fascinating seeing how that's all come together.
I agree. And, there's one of the things that he touched on. I just wanted to get your opinion. We didn't go too far into it when we were talking with Ben, but he encouraged us to go look at it. And it's kind of the maybe the future of podcasting or a future of podcasting where maybe you and I will have a new robot co-host if it pans out. But originally it was called Project Shasta. Now it's called Adobe Podcast. I think it's in preview. And it's one of those projects where you hear what it is, but then you go watch the video. And I'm, of course, tempted to then try it at some point. But it's one of those where you just record directly into web and your co-author and your co-editing working off of that with either your host or your guests. But then it got real magical when it got down into when you went into the editing phase. Say you and I were talking and there was maybe a paragraph or a minute or two that we wanted to cut. In the previous version, you would go in probably to Adobe Audition and trim it out and edit it down. Now you just go in and you highlight the words, the actual transcription that is being auto-transcribed there in real time. And if you want the ums and ahs gone, that's pretty easy. But if you want a whole section, you just highlight the paragraph, delete it, and then when you immediately play it back as if you're getting ready to, like you said, render the audio, it's already ready and it's already doing a lot of that trimming work for you. It's pretty cool.
I think that's going to be one of those moments that makes audio editing just much more reachable for most people. The tools that you use, for multi-track audio recording, it's been harder to use with things like Pro Tools, which require sort of a specialist move. And you've got these really low-end tools, but it can be hard to clip and bring things together, using some of those utilities. That's really exciting. And yes, we may be able to have a robot co-host. This trend keeps up.
So it sounds like Adobe offers us, of course, a lot of things for individuals who are creating and working with others. I think when we hear and share what Ben has to say when we chat with him, of course, there's a lot for the enterprise, and a lot of the integration points are to how to help business move forward. So let us take time now to hear from Ben Vanderberg and hear all the things between Microsoft and Adobe that have been either recently released or are coming soon. It is now time where we can turn to our guest, Ben, who has been diligently waiting there with what looks to be a Photoshop pillow, a couple of nice guitars. Ben, welcome to the Intrazone.
Thanks, Mark. Nice to be here. And yes, that's a Photoshop pillow, an InDesign pillow, as well as we have some Acrobat pillows here. We're really all Adobe here.
I love it. It looks very comforting, to be surrounded by Adobe. I think that's what this whole episode is about.
Actually, they ran out of the pillows when I was going to buy them. There was a whole set of pillows that you could buy at the store, but there's only so many that fit in my suitcase at one time.
Premiere is just one of my favorite go-tos for video editing, but we're plunging right into the second part of this conversation, talking about Adobe. Ben, could you introduce yourself to our audience a little bit? Talk a little bit about kind of your role at Adobe and how you happened upon this wonderful organization and this career?
Sure. So I'm Ben Vanderberg. I'm Principal Technical Evangelist for our Document Cloud and Digital Media Solutions. So that means things like Adobe Document Cloud is Acrobat, Acrobat Sign, as well as some of our Creative Cloud tools, like you mentioned Premiere earlier there, or any of our things like Photoshop, Adobe Express, as well as a lot of our cool 3D things. I kind of started this several years ago because I was working a lot with our customers on some of our e-signature and document solutions. And one of the things that we started a few years ago with that was our partnership very closely with Microsoft. So then that got me into the whole Microsoft world and how some of our different tools work closely together. And since then, I've just been out there talking about some of the great things that both Adobe and Microsoft do together.
And that's what we really want to talk about. There are, I think, a couple of spectrums of where the various teams work together. Of course, broadly across both companies, there's a partnership, and there's really nice information that we'll link to if you want to get the perspective from how Microsoft views the partnership, and of course, from Adobe's business side, how you all look at the partnership. When you think about the partnership between Microsoft and Adobe, I think there's a lot of what you work on directly, but at the macro level, what are some of the ways that you see both how we work together, the benefits to the end user, the customer value? What are some highlights that you would point out?
Sure. So Adobe has been working really closely together for a really long time. But in the last few years, since about 2016, we've been focused on cloud-based customer experiences, creativity, and also workplace productivity. So what that basically translates into is powered by Azure, we can really work on different ways that you work inside of Microsoft 365 tools, bringing the tools to where people work inside of there for our Document Cloud, Creative Cloud, and Experience Cloud tools. But also, even when you look at a lot of the customer experiences online that are powered by our Experience Cloud, how that then is connected back into Dynamics and Azure to really power those experiences and eliminate some of those data silos between productivity, customer experiences, and creativity.
It's interesting to hear you describe that. I'm playing it through my head a little bit. If you think about, historically where Microsoft has always been really strong on collaboration and creation, the trifecta of Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, it really feels like it's sort of like a really nice dovetailing, because the things that Adobe brings to the table to help people create and manage things kind of fit neatly alongside what Microsoft is already doing. Is that the right way to think of it?
Yeah, totally. So like one of the philosophies that we've kind of approached is that the way that people are working isn't like the way it was 10, 15 years ago, where people were like, everything was on the desktop computer. They'd open up their Windows machine and it's just desktop applications. These days, your everyday is a combination of I wake up, I look at things on my phone, I look at things on the web, I look at things on desktop, I collaborate with people in teams. So the way that people are working every day has changed. And what we believe is like bringing those tools to where people work is vital. So like if I'm in PowerPoint and I'm wanting to bring in some creative content that my marketing team produced, right inside of there, I can use the Creative Cloud plugin to drop in some of those approved assets directly in there. Or if I'm working in Word and I want to need to get this signed by my boss, I can just click that button directly inside of Word and send that out for signature with Acrobat Sign without leaving there. So it's really bringing that context to where people are working every day, which is just awesome.
If we add just a little bit more context, maybe getting a little bit into product, I think some of the macro things you mentioned are the tie-in with the Adobe Document Cloud in Azure, the experience within Office. One other area, and we'll get into a couple more specifics as well, is the approach that both you and we are taking with integrating Microsoft 365 and Power Platform. Can you provide that perspective of Adobe's approach into those two product areas?
Sure. So we've had some really exciting things with that. We were one of the early launch partners with Power Automate, or Microsoft Flow, it was at the time, that allowed us to be able to take a lot of our stuff that's APIs, like our Acrobat Sign, our Acrobat Services, which are some of your PDF and document workflows type of tools. We brought that into Microsoft Power Automate so that people can create those automated workflows that can go through an approval process and then, say, capture a signature or create a PDF, or even use some of the things like our AI-powered accessibility tools to make things more accessible for people with screen readers. What we've then evolved that into is we loved that so much that we've actually partnered with Microsoft to incorporate Power Automate into Acrobat Sign as a feature in our actual UI. So our Acrobat Sign customers are able to use Power Automate to automate their document workflows, both pre-signature, during the signature, and post-signature. So it's that workflow engine that's helping drive our Acrobat Sign customers.
So Ben, one thing I think that's really cool is the integration work you've done with our approvals team to have Adobe Sign show up as one of the actions that you can orchestrate through Power Automate. Why is Power Automate strategic for Adobe and your customers, our customers?
The reason that I think that Power Automate is very strategic for us at Adobe is that we see it as a powerful tool to connect some of our Adobe tools to also the realities within people's organizations, and that they're not just working with one application, they're working with a lot of different applications. They have a lot of limited resources that they're not going to be able to employ developers to be able to build these big giant enterprise solutions. So Power Automate is extremely powerful because a lot of our tools are powerful and they want to be able to do automation, but they don't want to have to write code or employ developers to be able to do that. So Power Automate is that low code glue that's connecting the dots between the desire that people have to automate and with our tools, as well as with Microsoft tools and the hundreds of different connectors within that ecosystem. So it becomes the glue really between Adobe, Microsoft, and all the other connections that are available in there.
Maybe we can move from talking about connector services back in and get into something that I know Chris and I love. I'm going to guess that Ben does too, and I'm also going to leap out there and guess that our audience does, is files and file types. And one of the big ones that we've been focused on for a ton, we know Adobe owns it, and would love to just start with maybe a brief history from your perspective about the PDF, specifically or the collaboration of where PDFs come into play.
Yeah, so one cool thing about this year is that it's actually going to be the 30th anniversary of the release of Acrobat, which is, PDFs, and 30th anniversary of the PDF. So if we go back in time, back to like 1993, one of the challenges back then was that when you open up a file type, you would open that up on your computer. But if I wanted to, say, share that with you, Mark, you might be running on Windows. I might be running on a Mac. You might be using the latest version of Word. I might be using an older version. And having something look the same graphically across different computers, across different platforms, wasn't the same. It would change. It wouldn't be compatible. And that was a big problem then. And then also you had the whole thing where when you printed that, what you see and is what you get really wasn't the reality of a lot of times how people were experiencing files. So we take that for granted these days a lot of times because everybody has opened up a PDF in the world at some point in time. But that was a big challenge there. Today, if I think about how we now have mobile devices, we have desktop computers, we have web-based interfaces, some of those same challenges of everything being consistent sometimes still comes up today because the different platforms, that becomes a challenge. And so PDF has still a very long life with people because that if you turn it into a PDF, someone's going to be able to open it, someone's going to be able to see it, and it's going to look exactly the way that you originally intended it.
I think the latest PDF that I have read and shared as a PDF was the latest Clearbox intranet portals report. And it is a very detailed report. It has lots of pictures, and the way that it's aligned as far as it looks a little bit more like it's going to be a printed book versus a web page. And it's always a really nice one to read through, but it does come across, I think, exactly how they intended. And it's laid out in a design format. It's not just words on a web page. It certainly is serving its purpose. And the other little point is, I can't quote an exact percentage, but a pretty significant amount of content that resides within SharePoint, the main content service in Microsoft 365, is PDFs. It's a huge investment, I think, that people to do that final output. And there is just a lot of them. Our goal is always to, store it in the best possible, secure, easiest to access. But on top of that, it's also then to make it a great experience. And that's where I thought we would spend a little bit more time to talk a little bit about the latest part of the partnership and insights into, where people experience PDFs and maybe also how.
Yeah. So speaking of experience, one of the things that I know that is, I think a lot of people have seen the challenge of is that, like, if you open up a PDF on your mobile device, I don't know how many times I've ended up having to pinch and zoom to try to read that PDF, and it becomes a little bit difficult there because of just the nature of a small device. One of the things that we have done to help solve that was we created what's called liquid mode, which basically analyzes that PDF and turns it into a responsive experience on your phone, which you can use with an Acrobat reader on your phone. So go check that out. It's a really cool thing on there.
But people shouldn't worry about it shorting out their phone. I don't want, liquid mode in a phone. That sounds dangerous.
Correct. No liquid is actually involved.
Phew. Okay.
But I think the other thing that's interesting today is, the world's been working at more of the speed of text rather than the speed of email. In that back in the day, people would attach a PDF to their email and then send it to you. You'd have a look. Maybe you'd comment and review it. You'd open it up, add comments, attach to an email, send it back, which is people want an easier experience these days. So like some of the things that we've been doing there is through our integration with Microsoft Teams, when you share a document for someone to view, like you drop it in conversation, you can have as your default view there, Acrobat inside of Teams, which brings along all the tools of Acrobat inside of there too. So you could comment in real time, just like you would say like a Word document on a PDF in a conversation in Teams. So it's working in that collaborative way that you might have not necessarily done before because it was a file, you download it, you attach it, you send it. Now you can do that in the conversation, and it saves automatically back securely into SharePoint or OneDrive and so forth. The other thing that I think that has also been interesting, and you mentioned that, a large portion of documents that are stored inside of SharePoint are PDF documents. I think one statistic I saw was something as large as like 40% of files are PDF documents inside of SharePoint, which is huge. And if you think about that, there's also a lot of security that people are also thinking about, especially when you're sharing those documents outside of SharePoint and stuff. And one of the great things that Microsoft's been doing with Microsoft Purview information protection has been awesome for Office documents. But what we've done as part of our partnership is we've incorporated that into Acrobat so that you can apply labels to your PDF documents so that those two can be encrypted and have your security labels applied to those different documents so that when you do share those on other platforms and stuff, those are secured just like your Office docs.
Part of the reason why we think integrating tools like Purview and having them show up really well for PDFs is, the world, I think, runs on PDFs as much as it runs on Office docs. And all of those like critical decisions and transactions are increasingly captured in PDF format, which is why I think being able to partner with you all on the security and compliance side of it's really important. One thing I think our audience may not realize is that all PDFs are not created equal. Could you maybe talk a little bit about like what happens in your native rendering engines and file formats for PDFs?
Yeah. So PDFs, certainly not all PDFs are created equal. A couple of the challenges that we have seen with that is just imagine all the possible ways that you could create a PDF. Some PDFs are scanned, so it means they come from an image. Some of them came from certain file formats like Word or PowerPoint or things like that. Or you have different like data systems that spit it out as part of a system. And where the challenges come in is that part of the original intent of PDF was to make sure that graphically it could be re-represented wherever that is. But when you have something that's like an image based like scan, that doesn't have, you could have the fidelity could be kind of low because it was a poor scan. there's not necessarily structure to that document because it was essentially an image. So there's nothing that tells a system that this is a header, this is a paragraph, or any of that type of information that helps derive and inform, or for that matter, tell someone who maybe is visually impaired what is the right reading order of different content within there. That information can be stored in a PDF, but a lot of times, depending on how that PDF was created, there's a lot of online free third-party type of tools. Some of those don't necessarily create a great PDF that make that portability and that readability difficult, not just for humans, but also for computers. So one of the things that we have been very mindful of is helping take a lot of that unstructured content, a lot of those PDFs that might not be as good citizens in the world, and turn them into data that you can push into some of your different models or AI models to be able to pull out that information in a structured format rather than something that you're having to depend on human eyes to try to derive what is the important content in there.
It's definitely something we hear about a lot. Some of our tooling that we're bringing out this year are around how do you apply OCR to not just images, but also to PDFs when you have those embedded images. And you're right, the problems with scan, really complex behind the scenes, and people don't stop to think about things like reading order and tables and all the rest of that.
Totally. I want to touch on one quick thing, though, there. One of the things that we've been trying to do, especially for our Microsoft customers, is make it stupidly easy to be able to access that information. And the cool thing about that is that those are just actions in our Power Automate connectors. So you can just leverage those directly in there. And it's basically one action, poof, now you have accessibility tags applied into your document. You want to be able to have a PDF that's now OCR'd, poof, now we have a PDF that is OCR'd in there. So now that's properly indexed inside of SharePoint. You want to be able to take the information out of that PDF document and have that as essentially JSON data so that you can then do whatever you want, put in whatever models, poof, you then have that in there. And those are all just actions. So it's simple and easy to be able to apply that into any of your workflows across Microsoft 365 there. I also want to touch on, Chris, one of the things that you mentioned also was on OCR. And the OCR is a term that a lot of people throw around, but it means different things to different people. Because for some people, OCR, they look at it as, I want to get this little element on this page and I want to put it into, say, like a database. For others, they're looking at it more for, I want this to be something that it OCRs it and puts it back into the PDF so it's indexed inside of SharePoint. Regardless of those are, again, actions that we make available in there.
Recently at your Adobe Summit, and I think also at the NAB show, that there was a number of different announcements. And if we could turn a little bit from today to tomorrow without any broad disclosures, we don't want you to say something that you're not supposed to, but you've been saying a lot from the Summit and NAB. Is there just some insights you can provide to us? I know there's some AI announcements, excitement around Firefly and Chris's tool that he mentioned. There might be some video editing type announcements that have been coming out recently. Can you help put a little bit more meat on what those announcements were and the importance to Adobe of what's exciting for you?
Kind of some of the things that we're moving forward and some of the recent announcements. One of the things that I find super, super cool that we announced at Adobe Summit is Adobe Firefly. And what Adobe Firefly is, it's our family of new creative generative AI models for helping create content using our generative AI, and uses all of the experience we have with tools like Photoshop and our Creative Cloud, as well as the 300 million plus high-res images in Adobe stock to train this model that you can go on and create all sorts of different content. And we announced it there. You can actually go to firefly.adobe.com and go and check out and create all sorts of different things up on there based on your text prompts, which is just fantastic. But one of the other things that we announced just recently at NAB was really how we can change some of the ways that we do video editing. So for example, I've spent years going through on videos and cutting different spots inside my video, just trying to get that timing just right, trying to find that right spot in the video so I can drop that in there. And one of the things that it does is it uses AI to transcribe the entire video, and then you can almost edit your video just like a Word document, where you go, you know what, I don't want to say that, so I can just select that, hit delete. I'm going to shorten and take this spot. I'm going to move this to this part over here. And it changes the timeline so that if you imagine things like this podcast and you're looking at a certain section you don't want to have in there, you can just read it in the transcription, just hit delete, and it changes the edit. It's super, super cool.
That's amazing. Yeah, when you think about the industry as a whole, the stuff that you've described and some of the other things, this whole explosion of creativity, which it's not like generative AI began with the release of ChatGPT 3.5, but there's just so much, it feels like pent-up demand and creativity for these kind of tools.
Yeah, there's definitely a big drive these days. Partly because I think as you look at generations, like when I was growing up, it was uber magic what I could do with Photoshop. But these days, a lot of the power that growing up in the 90s was like being a magician, people are doing on their phones these days. They have, little apps that are, changing and beautifying their portraits, which I would have spent hours, editing that in Photoshop before. So the idea of, and the democratization of creativity is something that I think is opening up all sorts of interesting ways that people can work together and collaborate. And then the whole AI part is making that even easier for people, where you don't have to learn some of these tools as easily. It's taking all that knowledge and making it super easy for people to be able to use, and creating cool new apps for people to be able to leverage, like Adobe Express or Adobe Podcasts, which you should also check that one out too, which is essentially taking the whole text editing thing and making it as a web-based podcast tool. It's super cool.
I honestly want to get one additional perspective from you, because as you and we are also introducing a lot of the, whatever you call them, generative agents, generative AI, there's a lot of photos and text-based, output. And of course, a lot of the being aware of what is a document and how to refine across a bunch of scale of, information that's out there. But when you think of the generative or just the notion of AI in your tools, what is then, the future role of the human? I know it's not necessarily such a broad, it don't have to be a philosophical answer. It's really whatever you want it to be. But when you see people working with Adobe technology a couple of years from now, when we all get a little bit more used to how these things work and what the role is of AI to help us, how do you see people doing things, with Adobe in a couple of years based on familiarity or innovation once it's refined?
I think it is a very fast evolving place that anything that I say right at this moment will probably be so quick and change that if you look back at this podcast 3 years from now, whatever I say will be like a dinosaur, just because it's moving at such a fast pace. But I think that creativity is something that is a human property that I don't think is as easy for an AI to be able to reproduce. And I think that AI is something that is complementary to the creative process and does not replace humans in that process. So when we think of some of the ways that we're applying things with like Premiere that I mentioned before there, that's stuff that would have taken hours before, but it accelerates creativity of the human to be able to focus more on the creativity part and not the grunt work of creativity. You know, when you look at some of the things that we've been highlighting and what we're exploring with Firefly is how do you take things within creative content and then use AI to eliminate some of the things that would have taken hours to be able to refine and everything like that at a pixel level and accelerate that part. And or using AI to help, you know, inspire people's creativity. So while, you know, you look at a lot of this stuff that is going at a rapid pace, I believe that creativity is still very much of a human thing. There's content that can be produced by AI, but creativity is not replaced by AI. If we look at so many different technologies where computer aided things have helped open up more ways for people to be able to work, like just imagine video. And instead of a cutting room and cutting things at an editing station, by working on a computer, that has made it so much more possible for me to be creative in creating that film that I would have never been able to do in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and so forth. So my belief is that creativity is that human process, and AI is only going to help people unlock their creativity.
You know, I think that's right. And I think, you know, speaking about the strength of the partnership that our two firms have, I think there's been a lot of novelty factor in the use of AI for creativity. And, you know, frankly, if you play around with, you know, the freeware version of DALL-E 2, you can actually get some really horrible images. And I think one of the things that I know Adobe brings to the table, and I certainly hope that we're laying our kind of professionalism alongside, is how do you do these things, you know, at industrial scale? Because if AI-based creativity is whimsical and hallucinatory and it doesn't yield good results, people are going to move on to the next thing. And I think there's tremendous potential here. But, you know, I think that the fact that we've been working with so many of these enterprise customers for so long on bringing, you know, values of stability and power and ease of use to the table, I think that that's something that we continue to let shine forth in this partnership.
I would say the other thing is, because you mentioned enterprise there, one of the philosophies, because you're right, there's been a lot of different generative AIs out there. Some of them produce great stuff, some of them a little bit questionable. Some of the ways that they trained some of those models, it was a little bit questionable as well. And we're in a world right now where there's some legal gray zone about who owns some of that content. Does that give attribution back to some of the original content creators and things like that? And one of the things that we've felt that's really important is because we have so many creators that Adobe Creative Cloud's, you know, their lifeblood that helps facilitate that. We feel like we should be creating the AI models that are ethical to the content creators, as well as commercially safe. So those enterprises can create content that is for their enterprises and relevant to their enterprises, but we're doing the right thing. We're not training models that are scraping things off of sites that then the content creators are looking back at it and going, that kind of looks like my art in AI form. That seems a little bit wrong now. So that is something that's really we're very conscious of.
There's an example I saw last week where Getty Images had a little bit of a concern because someone generated an image of a soccer player and it kept the Getty watermark that was on the original image that they had trained. It just looked like the person was standing at a different angle. And it was, you know, that's the kind of thing that I think will really hurt us.
I think when I hear you both talk about enterprise and of early discussions that I'm in or I overhear, I think there's a lot of excitement around what happens when we turn it to our content. How will it help us rationalize, prepare, be creative, but with our content? So there may be, you know, that might be images, that might be documents. And the notion of, well, how does it then work? We're in that moment too where, what is AI? What is available to it? And is that a danger? Is it a concern? But at the same time, flip it on its side, it'll be of a huge benefit once it's our content. We don't want, the external scraping, like Ben said, or the wrong thing that might be misrepresentative of who we are or, what our content is. Ben, just to wrap up here, you and I met at the 365 EduCon and, have seen some of what you've presented in the past. Is there a next place that you're going to be, and maybe a little outline of, if people were to catch up with you, what they would expect to see there?
So the next place that we're going to be is at Microsoft Build. So we're going to have a presence there. We have some sessions where we're talking about some of the latest things that we're doing jointly with Microsoft. So if you're going to that, definitely encourage you to stop by. I would love to see people there. We're also going to be at the 365 EduCons in DC in June, as well as in Seattle in August. So definitely looking forward. If anybody is going to some of those conferences, it'd be great to see you. And what we're going to be highlighting is some of the things around some of our document solutions, some of the things with Power Platform, and also some of our integrations into things like Microsoft Teams and stuff. So great stuff all around, and it's going to be fun.
Ben, hope to see you at Build. Chris, I think you're going to be at Build. There might be something brewing for you as well. And future events, EduCon, and all of that. Hope to run into you. And of course, anybody in the audience, take that as an opportunity to meet Ben, ask questions about your Adobe PDF, any routing, Power Automate, generative, maybe there will be a Ben bot that you can check out. Ben, thank you for being on the IntraZone and sharing a little bit more insight about Adobe and Microsoft and a lot of what it is that you and your team are working on.
Well, thanks for joining us.
Well, Mark, Chris, thank you for having me.
Up next on the IntraZone events, Mark and I take a whirlwind tour of the world of live events. We are back to doing live events all over the world. It's really exciting to see. And the first one up we want to share with you today is the Power Automate and Power Apps Developer Bootcamp Automation Summit 2023. That'll be May 19th and 20th at Microsoft's London office, which is right near Paddington Station.
Next up, May 20th is Collab Days Italy. This is in Milan. There are 15 sessions with a lot of great speakers. And as always, Collab Days brings in that value of your local network. So if you're in the Italy region in Milan, hit it on May 20th, Collab Days Italy.
Just a little bit to the north, a couple days later, European Collaboration Summit. That'll be May 22nd to 24th in Dusseldorf Fair, Germany. Microsoft's keynote will feature Besa Juvonen, Lori Podmeyer, Dan Holmes, Steven Siciliano, and Pune Kaufman.
And Chris, I'm going to let you do this next one because it is so tied to you and somebody who was most recently on the IntraZone.
That's true. So Document Strategy Forum 2023 is also coming up May 22nd through 24th at the Meridian in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's focusing on all things document and content management. Microsoft is one of the lead sponsors, and I'll be doing a keynote fireside chat with good friend of the program, Alan Pell-Sharp.
And these dates have been announced for a while. If you haven't already registered for it and planned to attend, whether in person or online, Microsoft Build 2023, that's May 23rd through the 25th. You can go to build.microsoft.com. Like I said, it's hybrid. A lot of all of the content, if not all of the content, will be available digitally. There's also an in-person experience in Seattle. And this is a show for developers, by developers, for developers. If you're a developer or you're developer adjacent and you just want to know, how can I encourage my developer to learn about the latest and greatest? It'll kick off with the Satya Nadella keynote. Then there'll be just a ton of breadth and depth with Microsoft speakers. There are some partner speakers. And of course, there are going to be a number of news and announcements. So stay tuned. May 23rd to the 25th, Microsoft Build 2023.
Coming up in June, Collab Days Netherlands. That was June 10th, 2023 at Vianen in Utrecht.
And then just to round us off, in the middle of June is 365 EduCon in DC, that's Washington, DC, on the other coast from where Chris and I are, or sometimes Chris is on the East Coast too. But 365 EduCon, from what we've been told, has a little bit of a slant to focus a little bit more on Microsoft Teams. Caruana Gatimu will be kicking things off with the opening keynote, but then it will get into the breadth and depth of all things Teams, Microsoft 365, SharePoint, OneDrive. They always put on a lot of great shows with both pre-day and post-day workshops. So if you want in-depth training, if you want to network, if you have a question, or you just want to get up to speed on all the news, they'll have that as a summary from everything that's happened before June 12th through the 16th, 365 EduCon in DC. We want to thank our guest, Ben Vanderberg, for being on the show and for sharing past, present, and future value highlights of the Microsoft Adobe partnership.
It was great just to see and be able to hear from him on that. Well, we'd encourage you to check out our show page for links to everything we talked about with Ben and more. Visit us at aka.ms/theintrozone.
You can send us your questions about Microsoft, about Adobe, about Microsoft and Adobe, and any feedback that you have for the SharePoint and OneDrive teams and anything specific, we'll shuffle off to Ben. You can reach us via email at theintrozone@microsoft.com or via Twitter at SharePoint, at mcashman, and at cmcnulty2000.
Remember to rate, review, and tell all your friends about the show. Follow the show wherever you get your favorite tech podcasts.
We thank you for listening. We are your hosts, Mark Cashman and Chris McNulty. This has been The Intrazone, a show about the Microsoft 365 storing a ton of PDFs, intelligent intranet.